Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
I'm well, Brian. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. You just got back from a trip to the East Coast. You're over here in my neck of the woods, a little further north, but on the east.
I did. I was up in New Jersey teaching advanced movement principles for the low back at Pilates Core Center in Cherry Hill, right outside of Philadelphia. Yeah, it was a great group, a really active, lively group. Lots of good conversation was had about how the low back works and what you're supposed to do about it. So it was really fun.
Fantastic, fantastic. Very, very good. Yeah, DC's been, as you probably experienced, it's getting a little warmer over here. It's becoming a little more summery. Today I walked outside to go to the bank and it was already like 82 degrees. I thought, oh, it's a little warm now. So summer has arrived on the East Coast. It's going to get steamy very soon.
Well, I think we're in the high 80s, which isn't bad for us, honestly, because it will get to the 90s and then it'll get to the hundreds. But yeah, summer's here. Time to turn on all of my watering and get that going. I know you guys don't even have to water sometimes over there, but here in California, if you don't water, everything dies.
Oh my gosh, we are having the hardest time keeping up with mowing the lawn. We have had so much water, so much rain that literally beyond. I mean, you mow your lawn, rain for 2 or 3 days, and immediately it's the same length as it was before, maybe higher. It's like you can't keep up with it. Oh, it's crazy, crazy.
Love it.
Well, today, I thought we'd continue on with our conversation from last week. Last week, we talked about postural assessments. Well, we did the assessment portion. I thought this week, what would be really cool to do is go into a little bit more detail on the muscles involved in posture. How do we train them? What do we train? And start talking a little bit about kinetic chain training, because as everyone's going to find out in a few minutes when we go through it, the kinetic chain has so much to do with how we want to train our posture. But before we get into that, I want everybody to do me a favor. If you haven't yet, hit the like, hit the subscribe, button for us. We really appreciate it. We are doing our best we've been at this a year now. We are in our second season. So we're trying to do a little bit more and a little bit more each week to make ourselves a little more known, to get our names and voices out there a little bit more. So anytime you can put a comment in under Spotify or Apple Music or on Facebook or especially Instagram, comment, like, subscribe, do all of those things for us. We would really appreciate it. It helps us out a ton. If you have anything you want to tell us, if you have any questions you want to ask us or a topic, hit us up at movingconvos. gmail.com, best way to get in touch with us. Instagram at Moving Combos. If you go into the show description, you'll also see Nora's and my personal Instagram stuff. And so that's how you can reach us. So now that's out of the way. So please like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff.
Yes.
All right. Please. We're learning. We're all learning here. As technological fogies, we're coming into the 21st
step at a
century
time.
here.
One step at a time.
All right. So let's talk about posture, musculature, and kinetic chain. And I thought a good place to start with this would be, let's describe what the kinetic chain is. When we talk about this, we've been hearing it for years. Let's find a description and an actual definition of it so that we're all on the same page.
Okay. So when I first started looking at the kinetic chain, I heard this concept. It makes a lot of sense because, kinetic movement, chain, how movement moves through the body. And also when I first heard it and I looked at how it was defined, I thought it's a good baseline, but there's often a lot of subtleties that I think are sometimes missing in the typical model. So a lot of times when they talk about the kinetic chain, they talk about how force moves from joint to joint, going from a mobile joint to a stable joint to a mobile joint to a stable joint, kind of moves through the body that way. And again, generally that works like that. But sometimes the body's doing something in an unusual position or an unusual environment where that kinetic chain kind of breaks down in terms of the mobility stability paradigm. Yeah. So Brian, talk us through when we start at the bottom of the foot. We
Mhm,
start with the ankle, right? The
mhm.
ankle is usually the first link in that chain. Is that mobile or is that considered stable?
The ankle is considered mobile.
Uh-huh.
The ankle is considered mobile. Now, we can break this down into even further. Some people would say the foot, that when we're in a standing position, that's considered stable because,
Okay.
a foot, when it's off the ground, is kind of like just a bag of bones. Things can sort of be limp within that when there's no tension put to the musculature. As soon as you put tension to it and you're standing on it, everything sort of, you know, becomes much more rigid
Firms
and
up.
gives us a nice firm platform for us to literally to stand on. That's
Hmm.
our foundation when we're standing. So that would be sort of our stable base. And then it would go into a more mobile, which is our ankle.
Yeah.
The knee would be considered, a little bit more stable. And how I
Hmm.
sort of look at this is the knee is considered stable only because it restricts range of motion in rotation when we're in a standing position. It has
Right, because
some rotation when we bend.
it doesn't have a lot of degrees of freedom,
No.
right? It primarily flexion and extension. There's some rotation capabilities, but unlike the ankle, which has kind of every degree of freedom, depending, the knee
Yep.
doesn't have that. So it's more stable relatively.
Exactly. We have flexion extension. The ankle is much more elliptical in motion. You
Hmm.
have flexion extension, lateral, some rotation,
Yeah.
supination, pronation. You've got all of that going on.
Yep.
Uh, when we get to the hip, again, much more mobile.
Right.
And, we sort of move up the chain that way because when we get to the pelvis, it's considered much more stable. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, they actually taught us like the SI joint was you know, anywhere from an immovable joint to a slightly movable joint, meaning it has maybe, an eighth of a degree of movement. And you and I both know that SI joint is not an immovable joint.
Tiny aside on the SI joint. Um, some of that is because the SI joint will typically auto fuse as people age. So it will
Mhm.
literally often just fuse and become immobile. And many of the cadavers that people work on are
Yeah,
old.
yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of that came from. Plus, there's kind of a male bias of the SI joint doesn't move. And any woman who's ever been pregnant is like, oh yeah, no, that sucker's moving right now, right where we are. So,
Yes.
there's that. So the SI joint, which is
Yep.
really, think of as the pelvis, right? That's kind of where
Right.
that's that joint between the sacrum and the ilium.
Yeah. And that even goes up into the lumbar because the lumbar is considered supposed to be more of a stable joint, whereas the
It is,
thoracic is much
right.
more of because we have a lot more degrees of rotation,
Yes.
plus flexion and extension, that's more mobile.
Yep.
Uh, the scapula, instead of going up, it usually goes out. So the scapula, we need to more stability, so
Hmm.
we train it for stability. And that's kind of, I just want to put this out here. When I look at that sort of chain, when you see it, I don't
Yeah.
look at it as this joint is a stable joint. It's more
Right.
along the lines of this is what I focus on when training this joint oftentimes, like my lumbar
Uh-huh.
spine. I often will focus on stability more
Right.
than mobility because people with back pain usually need more stability, especially at the
Right.
beginning.
Yep.
Whereas
Yep.
thoracic, we usually need more mobility because it's not moving as much. Well, with the
Nice.
scapula, we need more stability in general because a lot of times it's not where it should be. If we've
Yeah.
got any postural issues, it could be rotated out, it could be winging, it could be elevated, it could be in all sorts of different places besides where it should be. And if the tension isn't coming, I mean, guys, go back about 6 weeks ago in the archives and we did a deep dive on shoulders and we talked a lot about the scapula. You're going to see that there are, what do we say, 17 muscles that attach to the scapula that are pulling it in all the different directions, stabilizing it to the joint. So, really, all of those need to be working in conjunction, or else it's not going to be in the right place.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know,
So
then the glenohumeral is mobile and further down the hand till the hand. Yeah.
I like to bring that. I like the way you talk about that. That it's not necessarily that is always a stable place because the scapula
It
No,
moves.
it's pretty mobile as as joints go. It's got a lot of degrees of freedom in a lot of different areas. So that idea that you're going to focus on stability there, right?
Yep.
As opposed to in the thorax, you're often focusing on mobility because people get really stiff there.
Yep.
Yeah, so I like that way of thinking about it. That helps me to just think about the kinetic chain more in a better way. So thank you.
Yeah. And to me, it gives it more fluidity
Yeah,
because we want to create, a stable area so the mobile area has something to work off of. I say
a
it's kind of like a
platform.
crane. A
Yeah,
crane
yeah,
has a super, super long arm. Well, if it doesn't have anything on the other side of that long arm to give it counterbalance, it's
it
going to
falls
tip
over.
over. It's not going to lift
Right, not a
anything.
good day. Right.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So in for my shoulder, if my scapula isn't strong, isn't stable, I can't lift any weight with my extended arm, not very much
Yeah,
anyway.
right,
So
right,
you
right.
need to have that stability closer to the axial skeleton in that regard. Much like we've seen a lot of research now that shows that greater mobility in the thoracic spine leads to greater, lumbar health because that can
Mhm.
be more stable and it's not
Right.
trying to do all the rotation itself. So that again, that's usually my philosophy is where do I want to focus on and what do I want to focus on with those joints rather than calling it a stable versus a mobile joint. It's a
Got
focus.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing that I want to think about here, and this is why we want to bring this up in terms of posture. So this is kind of how they break down the kinetic chain. But if you're thinking about standing up, right, and you're standing up in good posture, all of those elements are working. So the other
Mhm.
way that I think about the kinetic chains is somewhat through myofascial trains from anatomy trains and things like that. So I don't
Yep.
just think about it from that perspective of the joints. I also think about it a lot from that perspective of what muscles are required to manage the body in that particular position, whether it's standing
Mhm.
upright, whether it's in a side plank or a front plank, or leaning over doing something else, right? So what
Mhm.
is required in terms of not just the joints, but what musculature, what myofascial trains and chains are required to support our body in the movements that we're trying to do.
Yeah. And if you look at it, I just sort of was going through my head. You can either look at this when you think of a kinetic chain from the fascial standpoint, where we
Yeah.
look at, you know, where we look at, the we have the lateral line, we have the superficial back line, we have all of these lines of fascia,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
of muscular pull. So we have that. We also have, if we just want to break down versus just specific muscles working
Uh
as a
huh.
unit. Like I think
Right.
of
So
anterior
chains.
shoulder girdle, posterior
Right.
shoulder girdle.
Yep. Yep. So this is kind of that global to local thing.
Right. Right.
Right? So sometimes you're looking very specifically at one part of a joint or one movement of an area, and maybe that's your trouble spot because it's either moving too much or
Mhm.
too little. And sometimes you're looking at how that's integrating with the whole up and down the chain.
Yeah. But some people also will just look at, the bones themselves because when we think of a chain like the spine really is like a chain. If one area is when they say, the weakest link, will break, it's very much like that in the spine. And one area changes, much like when you have a chain, when if you've ever played like crack the whip or something, where one
Mhm.
area does change and you have a deeper lordosis, well, guess what? You're going to have a deeper kyphosis. If you have a lateral shift on one side, often you're going to see a counterbalance up above or down below.
Right.
So
Right.
we can also see it within the joints themselves, and
Yes.
those are being affected by the muscles, which you could argue are being affected by the fascial suit as well,
Right. And vice versa. There's no chicken
and
or
vice
egg there.
versa.
Right. The fascial suit is affecting the muscles, which is affecting the bones, which is affecting the muscles, which is like that's just there's no chicken or egg there. Right. All of those
Exactly,
are working together.
exactly, exactly. So a lot of times it's where do people start?
Hmm.
Where would we want to start with this? Because if we're looking at posture, let's talk about what are the postures that we currently see in general. We're going to see rounded shouldered, forward head carriage. That's
Yep. Very
majority of our
common.
clients.
Yep.
Very
Tight front of
common.
the
Maybe
chest, weak back.
right, maybe just a little sway back, where the
Uh-huh.
spine is sitting behind the pelvis, or a deep lordosis, or a combination of the two.
Or a deep
You know,
posterior tilt.
deep posterior tilt,
Right.
exactly. Or we would see a deep anterior tilt of the pelvis.
Hmm.
So these are all very common things that we see in posture. And we have to figure out, okay, where do we want to begin?
Right, and I also wanna say not just in the sagittal plane, but also like a rib
Oh, yeah,
shift or rotation, right? So things get more complicated.
absolutely.
And one of the things that I was going through this in my in advancement principles the other day in my brain. So sometimes what I have to look at is if I'm trying to correct something like posture, the
Hmm.
first thing that I like to think about is do they have the range of motion available to correct that posture and how much? Right. So the example I use for that is the thorax. If I've got a
Hmm.
client, I've got two clients in my head. One of them was a dancer who was really like when she collapsed and she relaxed, she was very kyphotic. Her chest was really caved in, her shoulders immediately rotated, and that was how she hung out. And her head was a
Hmm.
bit forward, but she could, because she had the range of motion, she could straighten up and hold herself together in perfect posture when she chose to do it. So she had the range of motion for it. I've had other clients, and again, I think of another one of my clients who used to be a serious bodybuilder and weightlifter, who had the most rigid thorax of almost anybody I've
Mm.
ever worked with. Very, very deep rib cage, really, really a lot of kyphosis, and he was rigid. So he was a little forward, not a lot forward, but his head was forward and his was rounded forward with the kyphosis, and he did not have the range of motion to be fully upright. His
Right.
bones would not let him, at least at this time. Yeah,
Yeah. So I and what we talked about last time doing the assessment really comes into play here because we really want to take a look at what's going on, what ranges of motion can they do, can they
yeah,
even get into position. I remember when
yeah.
I had a TL junction dislocation, which is incredibly painful. Uh, and I was seeing a physical therapist. And, she said, we want to work on your posture. And what do? I immediately go military style posture. This was 15 years ago. And I stood up straight and she said, oh, honey, you're in kindergarten. You're not ready to graduate. And she was right.
That's
I thought,
great.
"Oh, I
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate this." She goes, "No, no, 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 no. You can't even physically get your body close to the position you need to be in yet." She said,
Right,
"You'll get there. It's
right.
gonna take years. It's not a matter of days. It's not just turning on your brain," like you said, that one client who just needs to have more, awareness of their posture and where they are, and they can
Mhm.
sit up straight and be good. It's much more of, "Oh, no, you haven't moved these body parts in years, so guess what? It's gonna take a little while for us to get things opening and moving." So, yeah, for us to do the assessment first and see what they're capable of, and is it only gonna require some minor modifications and awareness? Or is it going to be a complete overhaul where we kinda wanna do a body off restoration on the person and, say, "Come back in 2 years, we'll be working on your body," the whole time. So,
Yeah,
having that awareness for us as the trainer, as the instructor, is very important to see what are they
yeah.
capable of? What are they capable of today? And what are they going to be capable of 6 months from now or a year from now?
Right, because if you're starting to work on something like thoracic mobility, again, I'm thinking about this client that I have in my mind. We got to the point where he could really stand up nice and straight, and he wasn't so kyphotic. But it was a good, and he was willing to work pretty hard. It was a solid 6 months
Oh, yeah.
to really make a significant change, and then another 6 months before he could really maintain it, and it became a new position.
Mhm, mhm. And everybody's range of motion is gonna be different. I mean, you've seen
Yeah.
my spine. I'm not gonna get into thoracic extension. I'm gonna get to neutral, and I'm lucky, and I'm
Yes.
happy.
Yep.
That's my
As
body.
good as that's
I've got
that's as
a
good as we get.
Yeah, I've got a huge rib cage and my thoracic spine doesn't move as well as, it should in that sense. Whereas other people, you look at them and they can go into huge thoracic extension. They have that capability. But maybe that is their limiting factor because now they can't go into flexion there. So maybe their spine is a little too straight. They have that sort of straight spine. So again, everybody has a different structure, and that's one of those roadblocks that I remind people of sometimes, is there may be some roadblocks that are going to slow you down along the way, and structure being one of them. Because today you may not be able to actually move that body part. And it's going to take us time to get things mobile, to get things moving.
And I also said, I remember saying this distinctly to a client, I don't know what the potential is in your range of motion until we work on
Mm,
it. So if I've got a client who is a yogi and a dancer and whatever, and their range of motion is limited in a certain area, I'm probably going to assume they may have found end range if they've been really working on their
mhm.
mobility for a long period of time. I've got other clients who've never, ever, ever like leaned over and stretched their hamstrings ever in their life. And so them, I really don't know what's possible because they've never tried to work it. So that's the other thing too, is just, what is their background on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I love the idea of looking at things globally first and then getting
Mhm.
into local in this sense. Because when I look at the body, I like to look at it from behind as well as from the side. Because do you see rotation? Do you see lateral shifts? Do you see the anterior, posterior pelvic tilt? Do you see a lumbar lordosis, a kyphosis, all of these things? And taking a look at that big picture, you years and years and years ago clued me in on something, and I'm going to give the secret out today to everybody. You clued me in on this. It was the very first training that you and I had together. It was on the Coraline. And I've told this story many times. You're familiar with it. I had one of your assistants working with me and actually my mom. Now, you look around this room and I'm with all these Pilates instructors. I was 275, 280 pounds at the time. I was not the typical Pilates instructor looking body. I was barely lucky to move. I was very stiff and tight. And I couldn't do what the assistant wanted me to do. And she was getting very frustrated. And we were doing a lunge on the Coraline. And she was giving me 20 different things to work on. And I could not for the life of me figure anything out because she was overloading my brain. You came over and you gave me one correction. You said, straighten out your back foot. And that's the only thing. And it cleared up about 80% of what we were looking at. And in that moment, I realized, look for the one thing that's going to make the biggest
Yeah,
difference
if you
and
can.
go for that first.
Yep.
Make it count because I can throw 20 things at someone, but if I do, none's going to stick.
The other thing too is like, yeah, you have to let them absorb the information. Or this was
Mhm.
for you, this was a brand new piece of equipment. You had not been on it much before. They're teaching you a new exercise. So you were like, you don't know what you're doing, right? I mean, that's that. And your clients are like that all the time.
All
And
the
if you don't
time.
give them, yeah, right. That's like you're teaching them new things. That's what you do. That's why you work with them. Uh, and that idea of giving them a moment to adjust and also just to see like, how did that land? Like I always check it out.
Yes.
You say something and then you see what the body in front of you does. And sometimes it does
Yes.
nothing. And sometimes it does the wrong thing, and sometimes it does what you want it to do. And so okay, and so when I'm doing cues, you throw that cue out, and then you see, did it land? Okay, it did. Yes, they're moving in the right direction. We'll keep going. Or no, it didn't land at all, or they did the wrong thing. Then I try another
Yep.
cue. But
Yep.
again, one or two things is all the body can actually concentrate on at any given time, no matter who you are.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at something like posture, you
Yeah.
can work on so many different things at the
Yep.
exact same time that sometimes for me, it's okay. What is the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference today? And for
Right.
some people, it's okay. We need to stretch out their hip flexors. They are so
Right.
friggin'
Right.
tight there that
Yep.
until I get that to move,
Yep.
they're never going to be able to do anything else. Now, I can still exercise them. I'm not going to spend an hour just stretching a hip flexor. I can still do other things.
That'd be horrifying.
But my
Yeah.
focus yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
But
you're gonna
my
keep coming
focus
back to that, like, that's
right,
that's gonna be the
exactly,
thread.
for a while. And it could
Mhm.
be, okay, I wanna get their glutes to engage a little bit more because that's going to help with that
Yep,
hip flexor stretching. I can
yep,
put them in positions where it's going to help with that hip flexor stretching. So I can sort of guide my workout and my programming to put them in those positions and make sure that I teach them something to do at home that's going to help us out in the long run so that I can see a little bit of change there while I'm still doing all my other stuff, whether, lower body strengthening or whatnot. Cause, the last thing a client wants is for you to focus an hour on, just, something so small. They
Yeah,
are here to
it's
exercise.
not good. It's not good for them either. I mean, really, the body
No.
can only take so much input into an area at a given time. I mean, you can work
Right.
your legs for a whole session if you want to. You really can't work like your hip flexors for a whole session. It's just not a good idea. So
No,
I
it's
like
really not.
so I love what you said. Like if you can't find the one thing that does it, and that may take. That's why I brought up that cueing. Like it may take a few
Yeah.
tries to identify what that one thing is or what the kind
Mhm.
of root is, and it may be different in different positions.
Yes.
For you, when your foot was clearly causing everything to go wacky, just because
Yep.
but you were standing up on the core line. Lying down on the reformer, I might have had to cue something completely different to get the same effect.
Right.
And this is talking about how one thing, so this is talking about the kinetic chain, right? That one thing affected everything connected to it,
Yes.
right? And that's
Yes,
that
and it
lock
made
and
a
key, if you
huge
can find the
difference.
key. Right.
Yep. Yep. And when you can find the key, it can make a huge bit of difference.
Yep.
And that way you're not throwing too many things at them at one time. And for some people, it's every exercise is going to have that one cue to get them into better
Mhm.
position.
Yep.
And it's trying to figure out what that one thing is. And so you're not saying shoulders back, chest up, da 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 da, over and over again. It may just be, something as simple as open your collarbones
Yeah.
or widen through the
Exactly.
collarbones. That's something like that. Suddenly they're able to open up and you can see, okay, we've done enough. One cue has gotten enough for today.
Yeah.
For today.
That's organized a lot of things. That one thing. Let's focus on that.
Exactly. And we don't have to go beyond that because you and I have both been in situations where we hear other people, other instructors, they do that one and they get it, but now they're going to throw something else on top of it and something else on top of it. And, I have a client who drives me crazy. He'll always ask throughout the whole set of exercise, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Like this? Like this? Is this right? And I have to say, look, a quiet instructor, a quiet trainer is a happy one.
Right. Exactly.
That means you're doing good. You're
Yeah.
doing
I do not
okay.
need to keep talking. I don't need to keep just talking.
Right. Because if not, I'm just going to say the same cue over and over and over again. You've heard it. You've begun to,
Right.
process it. I can see it's working its way. I let it go. I don't need to keep harping on one thing over and over again.
One thing too, just to reiterate that, if you can find like the one thing that helps to organize, that I mean, my clients where I've been able to find that and it's really made a difference, that's something they carry with them everywhere. Like I think of one
Yeah.
client who had a bit of a scoliosis, not a major one, but a bit of a scoliosis and some hip issues and SI issues and back issues, kind of a bunch of things going on. And her thing was her ribs lived to the left. Like if she was hanging out, her ribs just shifted to the left. That's where
Yep.
they lived. And in her case, like if she brought those ribs over center, everything calmed down. Her back was happier, her SI joint was happier, everything worked better. So for her, it
Mhm.
was just ribs right, because your ribs hang out to the left, ribs right, ribs right. And that's all I would have to say. And then she would take that home. She would use that when she was driving. She would use that when she was like chopping and making dinner for her family. She'd use that like all day. That one thing, that one phrase would ring in her head.
Yep.
And what's not going to ring in her head is ribs to the right, drop your left shoulder, turn your head to the left, make your ribs, pull your abdominals in, engage your, like, they've lost it after one or two.
Yep. Yep.
So that and that's not obviously all that's happening, but that organizes that whole kinetic chain potentially.
It does. It does. I find a few things organize it well for most of my clients.
Hmm.
Often, if they're in the standing position, if they're doing a squat, a lunge, anything where we're
Yep.
standing, moving, I like to do a lot of loaded movement patterns and all of this sort of thing,
Yep.
focusing on their feet.
Yep. That's a proprioceptive base, right? Everything feeds
Bingo,
up from there. Hmm.
bingo. So, okay, if they're going to do a lunge forward, land, heel, toe. That's all I want them to think about
Uh-huh.
for a while, because a lot of people will try and land on their toe. Well, that puts a lot of shear force on the knee. They get a little
It
wonky. They
also gets
can't,
wobbly. It's not a very
gets
stable
very
place to land.
wobbly. When you land heel, you get your glutes and hamstrings engaged, the posterior chain
Yeah.
turns on,
Yep.
and that gives you a better base of support.
Yes.
So just that one simple reminder. And then when they've got that, I have them focus on the back foot. Is
Yep.
it turned out? Is it
Yep.
straight?
Yep. Where's the
Where
weight?
is their back foot? Where is the weight?
Mhm.
So
Yep.
something small like that, and I'll do that in a standing position rather than trying to make sure, well, you're sitting back in your hips, get your hips forward more, or you're
Right, your
shifting
hips.
your weight to the side.
Exactly. Yep. Get the feet.
I
Get the feet.
get the feet first because that will affect everything up that kinetic chain
Yeah.
slowly. It doesn't always happen overnight, but often, again, you can see things begin to change rather dramatically right off the bat. They're like, okay, and they can say, oh, I can feel that. And again, like you said, it's proprioceptive. They can feel their feet.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. If they can feel where the shift is, where the change is, it's like, oh, I got this. And they can make that change.
And that's
Whereas
teaching.
do they know where their knee is?
Right, right, exactly. I don't know where my knee is. And this gets to that. So using key points for that. Like, so if somebody's not standing, because in Pilates, you're not standing all that much, to be honest with you, then you've got to find other ways to find that same proprioceptive feedback.
Sure.
And we've talked a bit about proprioception, I think, at one point in one of our conversations. And one of the things that I think about is, where do they have contact? Where can they tactilely feel something? Right? Whether, like, if they're supine, their back is on the mat, and like, can they feel one shoulder digging into the mat, or are their hips lifted over to the right, or is one rib pushing more into the mat? Like, whatever those cues are. So again, using that base, using that
Hmm.
tactile feedback is a really good way to get that going. A client whose limbs are in the air, right? Let's say they're doing, I don't know, all fours. They've got all their arms and their legs are up, or not all fours, but supine, all their arms and legs are up. Where their arms and legs are, they don't have a lot of good feedback into that,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't inform the rest of their body in the same way. So where is the tactile feedback? If they're on all fours, where are the knees? Where are the hands? If they're in side lying, where is the hips? Where is the shoulders? So just thinking about how they're pulling. Even if they're sitting, where are your sit bones, right? And where are
Yep.
your feet on the floor? So looking at cueing into those places where they have good feedback and they can connect into is really important.
It's almost like you're trying to fix their anchor and let them feel where their anchor point is so they can
Yeah,
move out from that anchor point.
right. That's a good way to put it. Like, move out from that anchor point,
Yeah.
right? It's like that. That's an organizing thing. Like, shift your weight to both feel the equal weight on both sit bones. That
Yep.
changes kind of everything. Same thing with the
Yep.
feet, right?
And that's
Now,
something to keep in
yeah,
mind too. I
yeah,
love just something that simple, but how many times have we seen a client sit crooked and they're about to do a row or they're about
yeah.
to do, something that
We're about to add load.
they're going to add load. And
Yeah,
you're right. Just something simple like, okay, feel your feet on the floor, feel both sits bones. Okay, now let's take the load. So now they can feel that their body is centered enough. Not everybody's perfectly centered. They may still be rotated or leaning a little bit, but if they can at least have where that anchor is proprioceptively pushing down into a chair, into the sitting box, whatever you're,
yeah,
on, that can give them that enough feedback that now that's something to anchor to as they have that load. They'll know if
yep,
they're starting to lean. They'll know if they're shifting because they can
yep,
feel that. Yeah, I like
yep.
that.
So one other thing that you want to talk about, some muscle wise and what's happening
Yeah.
muscularly. And one of the things that is kind of a starting point for me on posture for sure, and then just kinetic chain integration, if I want to call it that, is plank work. Front plank,
Mm,
side plank, back plank. Can they hold their body in a line? And that's really engaging the entire, well, really a whole lot of muscles in the body, right? So if they're, for example, in a side plank, it's not just the side of the torso and the abdominals and the intercostals and the shoulder. It's also the abductors and the side of the leg and even
absolutely.
the side of the lower leg. So sometimes, if I'm really feeling like somebody's having a postural issue or having pain in certain areas, I'll assess front plank, side plank, back plank as modified as I need to to see if they're integrating that whole system. Because oftentimes
Yeah.
they're not, right? In a plank, their butt's up, right? They're tenting a bit, if you will. Or in a side plank, they don't have the strength to really support themselves on that shoulder, or the hip is dipping, or the hip can't dip
Or
and come back
rotating.
up, or they're rotating, or in a
Yep.
back plank, they can't get their butt up. I've worked with many clients where even with kind of a modified back plank, both feet on the floor, knees bent, hands behind you, kind of like a sort of reverse whatever, and pressing the hips up, and it's like, oh, your hips don't go very far. You don't have the strength for that. And they would take the legs straight and try to get their butt off the floor, and it just like they just don't have that back chain integration.
What's interesting is only in Pilates land do I see the back plank.
Uh-huh.
It's not common in fitness whatsoever. A bridge is.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you think about a bridge on a ball where your head and neck are on a ball and you're lifting into a bridge, it's
That's
very similar to a back plank.
yes.
You know, it's just a back plank is usually done with their hands on the ground, with legs either straight or knees bent and going into hip extension. And it's a good exercise, but we don't see it very often in fitness world.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's something that we probably should, take a look at. And, why don't we? I I tend to not use it on some clients just because of shoulder mobility issues. They may not have the
Yes.
shoulder strength
Yeah.
to put the
Yeah.
arms behind them and be able to hold themselves up, which is why using a ball or something like that, could, if I wanted to, be utilized instead of using my arms. But I do like the move. And it took me years to come around to it because every time I'd see it in, the manuals and things, I keep looking at it going, oh, why that move? Always
Mm.
because I come from more of the post rehab background. It's like, oh, the shoulders are not going to be happy. But if they have mobility there, it's not a bad move at all. It's good.
Which well, I mean, enough other ways to do that is partly, a lot of Pilates is building on itself in various ways. So another way to do a same version of the back plank is an exercise called magician, where the legs are essentially supported by relatively strong springs on the Cadillac or the trap table or the tower, right? And you're basically your entire body is coming up. Your weight is still on your shoulders, top of your shoulders, but the whole body's coming up as a piece and coming back down, like a straight leg bridge, if you will. But the whole thing is coming up and coming down. And that's again where I'm just looking at that integration of that whole back chain, because very
Mhm.
often clients have, for example, they're pretty good in a swan, like a prone back extension exercise, and they may even be pretty good in hip extension exercises. But when they try to put all that together, it doesn't come together, and it's not working as a unit to create that nice, tall, upright posture.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as you described that, it is interesting. We do in our facility a lot of with a ball hip extension
Yeah,
work where we're lying on our
yeah,
back and it's basically a
yeah,
bridge, feet are on the
yeah,
ball, lifting up.
yeah,
The ball creates some instability.
yeah,
Basically, that's what we're doing is a back plank.
exactly. You're just not
It's a
using the
modified
shoulders.
back plank. We're just taking the shoulders
Right.
out of it. I hadn't even thought of that, but that totally makes sense. And it's a great exercise because it does get the entire posterior chain firing.
Yeah. Another way, like in Pilates, we do that is also like on the ladder barrel with the back extension. So
Mm,
closed chain at the
yep.
feet, and then you've got the support of the barrel, and you can really get that whole chain, really from the calves all the way through the hamstrings, through the glutes, through the back line, all the way up.
Yep.
Again, this a lot of why I did this was because I would have clients, let's say they're on the ball. So to use the personal training example, right? Their shoulders are supported by the ball, their torso is supported by the ball, and their torso is trying to be straight and their knees are bent and their feet are on the floor. Yeah. And I would have them just try to lift their hips up from there. And I would find that it was hard for clients to do that. And
Yeah.
again, these are clients that looked pretty good in a swan and looked pretty good in hip extension on the mat, like let's say just prone leg lifts and things like that. But man, they could not bring the whole thing together. And so that's really where I started to play with that idea of how does the whole piece integrate? Because that's what you need for the kinetic chain to support posture. It has to be
Mhm.
integrated all the way up.
And usually the plank in all three different ways. You know, s- what you would refer to a prone plank, which is more of the anterior, the back plank, and the side plank, is really
Yeah.
getting a lot of muscles to integrate together because it's not just your core.
Yeah.
You know, how many times have we seen someone go into a lot of kyphosis and you can just see their shoulders are overworking in a regular plank
Yep.
position?
Yep.
They can't get the shoulders out of the ears. They're overloading one area, so they're not getting the rest of their body engaged at all.
Yep.
And really, it is about trying to get everything working harmoniously, together and one time. And I find as soon as you do that, you could see their face relax. You could see
Yeah.
the struggle go down.
Yep.
It's like everybody sort of is pitching in like tug of war. It's not just one person and everybody else is just sort of standing around saying, "You want me to do what?" It's
Right.
everybody pulling at the same amount of, resistance. And that's makes it a lot less effort for every muscle involved.
And this is where the idea of the kinetic chain, so you mentioned a little bit earlier. So coming back to that, all of those pieces have to work together with good timing, with good coordination, all that piece. And you see that when you watch somebody walk or somebody run. I'm a big fan of watching the Olympics and watching amazing athletes do amazing things. You watch them and it's like, okay, their timing is impeccable, right? The force transfers from the hip to the knee to the foot and back, just like boom, 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 very fluid. And then you're sitting there, and I used to live near a lake and I would watch people run around the lake, and you're like, okay, the force is not transferring as smoothly on that client. It's getting
Yes.
stuck in their anterior hip. And you see like, ugh, like you could just see the force getting stuck in their low back or stuck in the anterior hip or stuck in their kyphosis or something. And you just see
Yep.
that that force isn't moving smoothly through, that kinetic chain is failing somewhere. And what you said
Mhm.
earlier, which I wanted to bring up, is oftentimes what you're looking at again is all the parts participating appropriately. Because if one part can't do the job, somebody else is going to overwork to do it,
Sure.
right? And then often
Yep.
you'll get trouble with that.
Absolutely. No question. And that's really what we're talking about. We talk about the kinetic chain is getting everything to work together harmoniously, so every muscle is doing the appropriate amount of work, not overworking, not underworking. And when we go back to talking about posture, when you have someone who has that kyphosis, who has the rounded shoulders and the forward head carriage, you my first instinct is, okay, we need to just see, can we even get those muscles to work? I remember a client that I had
Mhm.
who
Yeah.
had Parkinson's, and he was so flexed that I couldn't get his posterior shoulder girdle to contract at all. And
Well,
the
that's
only way I
reciprocal
could
inhibition, right? And it's in a matrix. That's
exactly.
total reciprocal inhibition, that they're so tight they can't actually get the muscles in the back to work.
And what I had to do is put him in a corner with his
Uh-huh.
hands on the wall and lean forward into like a chest stretch,
Yep.
and then forcibly bring those shoulder blades together and say, okay, now
Mm,
hold that.
mm.
Can you feel that? And only then could he get a little bit of proprioception. Then it's like, okay, come away from the wall 1 inch. Can you hold that? Can you hold that? So literally, it was just an isometric. Can I just get him to feel that? And in my mind, I'm hoping, I'm like, can this work? Can these muscles, honestly, I was thinking about all the, how, those muscle, connections sort of shorten. And I was thinking, are they pulled apart so much that they're not touching anymore? My mind is starting to go to those sort of extremes, thinking he physically can't do that. But once I got him in position and brought the shoulder blades together, when he was relaxed, leaning forward, okay, now squeeze, now get the isometric. So I had to wake the muscles up.
Yes, absolutely.
Then I could begin to focus on the posterior shoulder girdle a little bit more. I could
Mhm.
begin to focus on, small things, pulling things back. And it's a challenge when you're trying to do that because as we said, there's a lot of things going into posture. I mean, do you focus on where does their head sit on their body? Do you focus on where their ribs sit? Are you focusing on their lumbar spine being in a huge lordosis? You really got to figure out, how to adjust all of them, but also not overload them at the same time. So it's a tricky dance to do.
Very tricky.
Yeah.
Agreed. Uh,
Yeah.
so when you see that, when you're looking at the kinetic chain, you're looking at like, this is that global to local. Is it breaking down somewhere? And in your case, it's breaking down in the thorax. Another
Yes.
classic example I use a lot, which I seem to be bringing up today, is the breakdown in glute and hamstring strength and hip extension.
Mhm.
Right. So if somebody's generally a little anteriorly tilted, maybe they're lordotic, very tight in their hip flexors, like to get the glutes and the hamstrings to even fire.
Yeah.
Mm. Right. So, like you, sometimes if they're prone, they're just lying on their stomach, they're literally at the end range of motion and they can't get any more movement or any more activation in the glutes and their hamstrings. So then, like putting them over a box or putting them over a ball where the leg starts in hip flexion, like for your client, starting in protraction of the scapula and then or retraction of the scapula and moving them into protraction, whatever range they've got, right? Like find a
Right.
range they can actually work, even if it's not where you want them to go. So in that case, like having them over a ball or over a box and doing just their hip lifts from there, they may not
Yep.
get to even neutral. They may not get to flat. They may just get part of the way up, and that's as far as their range of motion is going to go before they either go into deep lumbar flexion or lumbar extension, or
Yep.
they just can't go any farther. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite exercises for that is over a ball, belly over the
Mhm.
ball,
Yep.
where their body can be nice and straight. And I'll usually put the ball a little bit more over their hips. So their hands are supporting their upper body a little bit more and do a
Yep.
hip extension, but I'll have
Yep.
them hold it and only go as
Yes.
high as they can until they want to go into lumbar extension, which, like you
Hmm.
said, I may only get that 2 or 3 inches off the ground, maybe.
Yep.
But then hold, 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 10-second hold, then drop the foot down and repeat the same side. And I'll have
Yep.
them repeat that side 5 times or 10 times with that hold. Each repetition, they'll come up, maybe a centimeter more, maybe. And I find on the second set, they get a lot more neurologic waking up because suddenly I
Yeah.
can tell them squeeze it. And they're like, oh, I can feel it now. It's like, all
Yes.
right. And for some people, that's how we have to start their workout. It's like, okay, I got to wake up these muscles because we're going to
Yep.
have to use them in a
Absolutely.
second.
Yep.
So let's stretch out what we need to stretch out, get moving, and then let's get those muscles firing because I need to get them warmed up, priming the pump because we're about to do other things that are going to
Whatever.
involve that.
Right. So thinking about that with posture and the kinetic chain. So if somebody doesn't have that mobility, right,
Hmm.
with their hips, like what are we trying? Like, why are we fixing that? So when I think of somebody who doesn't have that strength and that connection from the low back through the glutes to the hamstrings, whether it's weakness or whether it's lack of mobility, when that doesn't happen, then oftentimes the low back is going to take more of that load. So that
Ah,
extension, instead of
yep,
happening in the hip with every walk or every run, right, every ordinary stride that you take, that leg is going to ideally go behind you into hip extension. And if it
yep.
can't do that, then that extension is going to go right into the lumbar in a relatively,
Jerky way.
frequent,
Yep,
jerky and continual way, right? It's going to start in one position, then move into that extension with potentially some stress and some impact.
yep, absolutely. We see that all the time, all the time. If the glutes aren't firing, the lumbar takes it and it's going to
Yep.
fire with every step you take.
Yep. Exactly.
So, yeah. And for some people, listen, posture can start with just doing something as simple as pelvic tilts in a supine position.
Hmm.
Just starting something like that, a pattern that I've used many times, because we often see people with the kyphosis,
Hmm.
with the lordosis in their cervical, as well as a deep lordosis in their lumbar spine, is okay. I want to find a neutral spine for them. So let's
Hmm.
start with pelvic tilts. Let's see if we can get that moving just a little bit so that they can actually use and move their spine a little bit. Then, when they're in neutral, I'll have them take their arms straight in front of their body, sort of up to the ceiling. And now, without arching your back, take your hands over your head slowly.
Yep.
And you'll see tightness in the lats, tightness in the serratus, tightness in the
Yep. Yep.
shoulders.
Yep.
But repetition upon repetition, suddenly they're going a little further back. They're getting a little bit of thoracic movement, not a lot, but a little bit. And again, it's in a supine position, so they've got a lot of proprioception. They can feel how much their back is coming off. And I love your cue of maybe putting a towel under their low back so that they can
Hmm.
feel that. So they have that feel, that tactile
Yeah, they got some
proprioception.
feedback. Yep.
Yeah, they can, and you can say, "Are you still feeling the towel?" "Oh no, I've arched." Okay, and you can
Yep.
cue that. Have them take their arms up overhead so they're getting a little bit of thoracic movement. something even as simple as that is a great place to start for those people who are so fixated in their spine and don't want to move. So just some ideas to throw out there that it's an easy way for us to get the body moving in a safe way, in the sagittal plane.
So the other thing that I work on a lot when I'm looking at the kinetic chain, we again we tend to focus sagittally on the front and the back. That's
Yeah.
normal, but I often find that sometimes the magic is a lack of balance or a lack of integration or lack of strength in the ladder, in the frontal plane, in the side body, basically.
Yep. Yep.
And so very often, like, they're good in the sagittal, and I've gotten that all organized, and then I go to do something like a side sit up on the Pilates arc or the spine corrector in Pilates, or over a ball, or even just a side sit up. And it's like right side is fine, left side has nothing. Like
Right.
they go to the left side and literally don't even know how to start the exercise.
Mhm.
And again, thinking about that whole kinetic chain, I want to work the torso for sure, right? Going through the side of the ribs, the abdominals, and a little bit of psoas, a little bit of QL, all those pieces that are working. But I find I often get that working, but what's missing is often that connection into the abductors and then down to the whole lateral leg. So
Mhm.
then, just like we talked about with a back plank, I do the same thing with side plank, even if it's just any kind of version of the whole side body having to lift itself up, right? Having to integrate from the ribs through the pelvis, through the legs, and all the way up.
Mhm. And something to keep in mind with that, uh, the lateral line, the frontal plane, we have a tendency to focus a lot on our obliques. We have a focus on our hip abductors a lot. I find people forget about the adductors. They forget about the
Yeah,
opposite adductor because
yeah,
if I've got a client right now who, I was working with one of my staff and they've been blasting their hips and their hip is nice and strong. Their right hip is nice and strong, but there's an imbalance. There's an imbalance. And they came to me and I said, what about the left adductor? And you could just see the light bulb going off and, oh yeah. I said, keep in mind the opposite adductor works
mhm,
with the opposite
yep, exactly.
abductor.
You got the mirrors. Yep.
And that sometimes can be the magic. And that's sometimes what's missing is they're not getting the adductor firing. They're getting the abductors, no problem. They can do, I'll have them do the 7-way hip. I'll have them do, all sorts of stuff, closed chain, and they're doing great. But all of a sudden, they still have that imbalance. You look at the opposite adductor, and it's not there. It's like, oh, well, we may have discovered something here.
I've just been working with a client who has a lot of lateral leg pain. She had a plantar fasciitis on one foot. And then she also had sacroiliac joint issues on the same side, so on the left side. And she's generally fine, but the last few times she's kind of had this pain, and she said her left knee would always feel like there was kind of almost a cramp in the back of the knee every time she walked very much.
Huh.
So I'm like, interesting. What's happening there? And then we started to play with some things where she was actually having to support her weight on that side leg, and it was like, oh, it's so much weaker on her left. And so we played a little bit with that just irritated things. So then this last session we basically said, okay, we're going to activate your adductors the entire session. She basically spent the session with a ball between her knees or her ankles or something, to take
Yep.
the stress off that lateral side. And by the end of the session, there was a lot less pain on that side, because in her case, that imbalance had really overactivated the abductors, which were clearly not
Yeah.
strong enough to do the job. And they weren't relying enough on both parts of the chain, whether it's anterior and
Yep.
posterior or medial and lateral. They need to both work together to support that pelvis three-dimensionally.
Yeah. Yeah. And people forget about that when they do. Well, we've talked a lot about training
Yeah.
three-dimensionally,
Yeah.
is the opposite side for this,
Yep.
that they balance each other out. And
Yep.
we've talked about this in Pilates. Great focus on the adductors. Great focus because feet and straps and all of the stuff that you can do, you really get a lot of the adductors. not as much as the abductors. Well, in
No,
fitness world, not
it's
many
the
people
opposite.
focus. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
People aren't focusing on their inner thighs very much unless it's, I hate to say, that machine in the gym where you just
Right.
squeeze them,
Exactly.
you know,
Yep.
and you're not really doing anything. I mean, I find that's a waste of time. There's other ways that you can really get that going and get it a lot stronger. And what I find with a lot of clients in those situations is one side will be a lot stronger than the other. So that's the
Yeah.
imbalance.
Yes.
And if they
Exactly.
have SI
Yeah.
joint
It's the
or low back
asymmetry.
problems, that asymmetry, because those muscles attached to the pubic bone, they
Mm-hmm.
affect the pelvis, it works all the way up
Mm-hmm.
the kinetic chain.
Yeah.
So sometimes by going down a little bit further and say, "Ah, okay, let's balance that out a little bit." And all of a sudden, boom, it's like we hit upon, the magic for that client.
Right. And this client actually is interesting because she said she's had pelvic floor issues since she was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh. So that led me also just to think like those adductors have not been doing their share of the job for her whole life potentially. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, that's interesting. And she's pretty strong in a lot of other ways. So it's like, it's that right left imbalance. It's that abductor adductor balance, not just on the one leg, but between the legs. And again, that's not supporting that pelvis evenly. As I sometimes use the analogy, when you don't have the lateral systems, the abductors and adductors doing their share on the pelvis, it's like a table with two legs and no feet. That has no stability at all, right? You need the third
Mhm.
leg, or you need the fourth leg, you need feet, something like that to make that stable. And working on those balances all the way through the kinetic chain.
Yeah. Well, we covered a lot today.
Hmm.
I think the take home comes down to what you said toward at the beginning when we're looking at posture, when we're looking at the kinetic chain, is looking at it globally. What do you see
Yeah,
as the whole body?
yeah,
Then what changes can you make locally
yep,
out and see, does it work? Does it seem to be changing things? If it doesn't, move on, try something else. That's in a static position. I loved what you said about watching people run is where are they getting stuck?
hmm,
When you watch someone in an exercise, I'm thinking of a client in my head right now that oh man, we must have been doing walking lunges for 2 years before he finally got it. His hip flexors were so bloody tight.
mm,
And finally they started to let go and his glutes started firing in the correct way, but it took a long time. He's an older gentleman and it just took a while for him to, you know, get things going. And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, he was doing them perfectly. I mean, it was textbook. And he said, "Look what I can do." I mean, he was so proud. He said, "Look what I can do." It was just, okay, it took time, but I could see where was he getting stuck. Okay,
yeah,
that's where I need to focus.
yep,
And
yep,
that's what if seeing them in motion does is not just, okay, looking at them globally, statically, but in motion. Where are they getting stuck? Where is the roadblock?
yep,
Where's that kinetic chain when you, like we say, crack the whip, where you begin to, you know, have the chain move, but where does it stop? Where does it sort
yeah.
of hit a wall? You're like, oh, it didn't go any further than that. Okay, we got to work on that.
And if you guys think you don't know how to see that, because I know a lot of teachers are like, well, how do you see that? I recommend a couple of things. One is putting on YouTube like a high level elite runners race. Like I love to watch Usain Bolt, so I'll just put like there's a lot of YouTube things on him. I'll just watch him run,
Yep.
and all the guys at that level run, and you see the integration. You see how the hips are moving and how the torso is moving in relationship to that, and how the rotation is like you see that, and then take a look at your local supermarket or your local park. If you've got somewhere where people run, it's not subtle, people. It is
No.
not subtle. Like if there's something going on, it's often glaringly obvious.
Yep.
And that's one of those things. Like you think I can't see it. Oh yes, you can see it. You just have to look. And
Yeah.
and again, be somewhere where there's like a bunch of people running, whether it's a track or in my case it was this lake. And I would just sit on the bench and I would just watch. And I would kind of try to point out, oh, right hip, right shoulder, what is
Yep.
happening? Why are they not moving their right arm at all? Right? They're like
Yep.
everything's happening with the left, or that right leg's all turned out. and that left leg is not, and they're flicking that little foot just on that right side. There's no
Yep.
hip flexion happening there, whatever it is. Those things will start to become clear to you. And then it's like, okay, now I know what to work on.
I like doing it with walking
Yeah. Yeah.
because I can go to the mall and you can watch so many people walk and I'll walk behind them. I'll just start walking in a direction and find somebody and walk behind them. And you'll see they'll rotate to one side and then come back to neutral and not
Da, da,
rotate to the other.
da,
You're like, huh.
da, da.
And then you can look at their legs. Are they extending through that one side or do they have a hitch and they're giddy up on that side? Huh. Okay. Do they have a little lateral you can start to see a few things, and there's so many people to choose from
Yeah.
that you can begin to say, oh, wow, big difference between that person and this person because this
Yes.
person looks fluid, looks great.
Yes.
This one, about the
Something
same
weird's
age, but this
happening
one just
there.
doesn't quite look right.
No.
And again, you don't have to diagnose. It's just looking at it saying, huh, what am
What's
I
happening?
seeing? Where do
Exactly.
I think it's getting clogged? So, a couple of ideas for you to try out. Take it
Mhm.
as you will. Thank you guys for joining us. Again, our socials, please like, subscribe, do all the kind of stuff. We're also on YouTube, so you can see us, I want to say see us live. Well, you can't see us live, but you can see us in pictures. So it's always fun to sort of see what we look like. And, we're quite animated. So you can see us there too. On my YouTube channel, if you just search for Brian Ritchie or Moving Conversations, that'll pop up. At Moving Combos on Instagram, Moving Conversations on Facebook, and movingcombos@gmail.com. If you have any suggestions or any ideas, please hit us up. We love to hear from you. And until next time, we'll see you next week. I'm Brian Ritchie for Nora St. John. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.